From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you live for another journey through the news and headlines of our time. Guided by personhood principles, not toxic groupthink, we are redefining the way news can be approached, not going to focus on left versus right or third parties or any of that. We're just going to get down to common sense and get ideas and solutions worked out neighbor to neighbor. Joining me now to do something just like that, hopefully, is a guest who's in the Tampa Bay area. He's a veteran of the CIA and State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. He is also someone who provided training to U.S. military special operations for 24 years. He, on his website, says he's vilified by the right and the left, which means he must be doing something right. We have Larry Johnson with us. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you, David?
I'm doing great. Now, for those who are not familiar, anything else we might need to know about your background, how you came to be known for some of the things that you're writing and talking about in the news?
I just had one of those unique experiences where I got to participate in both CIA intelligence activities, both on the analytical side, the operations side, policy making at State Department and counterterrorism, and then working closely with military special operations and with transportation security entities, both maritime and aviation. So I was not your typical government employee. I got to really see how the sausage was made in a whole variety of fashions, and had a lot of contact and work with the FBI back when they were worth a damn.
And you also say you're a bona fide son of American revolutionaries. What's your story there?
Oh, I've got at least 28 ancestors I've been able to trace that fought in the American Revolution. One of them would be my fifth grade uncle, Charles Thompson, who was Secretary of the Continental Congress. So he actually had in his possession the Declaration of Independence for 17 years, from the signing until the Federal Republic was finally firmly established and turned it over to the federal government.
So one of the things that I want to know just off the bat before we dive into your kind of perspective on what's going on in the Ukraine war, we've got the history of this project, Mockingbird, and the government having such a close relationship with media outlets. And there's always been debates for those who are not a part of the establishment as to whether the nearly identical talking points that you see on so many independent corporations that are ostensibly competitors to one another, but yet have the almost exact same narrative cues, is it a result of mimetic groupthink, or is it some kind of incestuous relationship with government? Of course, we know that they love government bureaucrats, and they want to. There's always that standard argument of they just want to have access to the powerful, and they know that they have to write reports that launder out powerful interests talking points effectively if they want to keep having access to that. But is that really all there is to it?
Well, I think now it is definitely corrupted. There's definitely let's call it incestuous relationships. The media is in a very, very different place than it was 35 years ago. So when I started or 37 years ago, when I started with the CIA in 1985, back then, yes, the CIA was actively involved with trying to manipulate and control messaging of press overseas. But it really didn't have a lot of control over what was going on domestically, because that was still back in the heyday of investigative, legitimate investigative journalists. People like Seymour Hersh was the prime example, who could pursue stories that oftentimes the government wanted to cover up, but couldn't, and things were exposed to the light of day. There was actual diversity within the media, and you could count on the media to be a legitimate, sort of the fourth branch of government, to provide a check on the other three. That's gone. That died, started really right after 9/11. And what we're faced with now is a media that is probably more controlled and more committed to passing on falsehoods and lies than anything that existed under the Soviet Union when they had places like Pravda and Izvestia and TASS News. We live in an age of disinformation in terms of the official media. The saving grace for us is that there are still radio programs like yours. There's the Internet. And the problem with the Internet, though, is you really have to do some digging to try to ferret out the gold from the chaff and figure out what's really genuinely valuable and what's misleading.
So there really a lot of these media outlets are just true believers in the narratives that they hear from their government, right? They kind of I see them as kind of like proselytizers for the gospel of their Messiah that they kind of believe in, right?
But part of it is because more and more the media outlets have fallen under the control of a small number of corporations, that those media outlets now serve the interests of those corporations rather than serving the public interest of getting to the truth. And sort of the same phenomena is taking place within the government, particularly within the intelligence agencies. This is not to say that there was some ideal period where the intelligence agencies, particularly from working with analysis, conducted themselves totally honorably or without political pressure. I mean, I faced political pressure firsthand back in the 1980s when I was working on the whole Nicaragua-Contra issue. But what's taken place now is it's almost impossible for someone to really be a truth teller that is going to go against the grain of what government policy is.
Yeah, I want to dive into some of the stories that you've published recently on your website, sonar21.com. You've got some interesting headlines. One of them you published just a couple of days ago, "From steadfast noon to 1 minute to midnight, is NATO going nuclear?" And that's something that's on the top of mind for a lot of my listeners, and it should be the top of mind for everybody. I mean, particularly here in the radio side of things, the Tampa Bay and Central Florida area would be one of the top spots for a strike, would it not?
Yeah, MacDill Air Force Base with CENTCOM and SOCOM there. I spent a lot of time on that base. It would be a prime target. What this highlights is both the lies of the media, because if you listen to the media, it is Vladimir Putin and the Russians that are threatening to use nuclear weapons. They're threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons. Well, that's just an absolute lie. It is not true. At no point in the last 3, 4, 5 weeks, or any point before that, has Putin or the Foreign Minister Lavrov or the Secretary of Defense Gerasimov, have any of them suggested, implied, intimated using nuclear weapons. What they have pointed out is that they are going to retaliate against NATO if NATO continues to attack Russia. And within that context, you have had Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine that is being backed by the United States and NATO, call upon the United States to conduct a first strike attack on Russia. Well, when you conduct a first strike attack, that's a call for using nukes. What makes right now sort of so dangerous is the United States and NATO are conducting a nuclear exercise. It's called Steadfast Noon. The purpose of that exercise is to practice arming NATO aircraft with nuclear bombs that they will drop on Russia. So if you don't think that that's a provocative step, then I don't know what else to say to you. It is true that this has been an annual exercise that's gone on every year for the last several years. What makes this time different, though, is NATO and the United States are actively supplying Ukraine with weapons systems that are being used to attack Russian territory. And from the Russian standpoint, that is an act of war and can elicit a retaliatory response.
So what exactly kind of nuclear strikes are they practicing here? Are these the old-fashioned ones like they did in Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
Yeah, no, basically they're putting let's call them iron bombs or even maybe some smart bombs on planes, having the planes fly out and simulate a drop. That would not be the truth of the matter is that would not be an effective attack on Russia because Russia has developed probably the best anti-air defense system in the world, surpasses anything the United States has. And part of that was made possible thanks to George W. Bush. George W. Bush in 2001 unilaterally ended the anti-ballistic missile treaty that at the time limited what systems could be developed by both the United States and Russia. And as soon as the United States walked away from it, Russia said, okay. Russia spent its money on developing defense systems, in contrast to the United States, who wasted literally billions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq, instead of working on developing effective missile and aircraft defense systems.
So they're not prepared to show up in the things that they're trying to press towards, it seems.
Correct.
What kind of insane, I don't understand, because I think these people, I think they're intelligent, but they don't seem to do things that seem rational or intelligent. It certainly doesn't seem like it's in any of our interest to be pushing us to the brink of nuclear annihilation. And one thing, I think about is, there's so many stories constantly warning us of the danger of climate change catastrophe, and yet there's hardly anything in these old media outlets that talks about how serious the violence, the devastation. It would be untold damage and horrors that could arise from these nuclear strikes going out of control.
Well, that's true. And one thing the American public just does not understand. We continue to live with, I call it the myth of mutual assured destruction. And part of that mythology is that the United States has the same level of capability that the Russians do, and that whatever the Russians try to do to us, we could do to them. Well, that's no longer the case. Russia's air defense system, anti-ballistic missile system, now has probably a 90% chance of shooting down the vast majority of intercontinental ballistic missiles, air-launched cruise missiles, sea-launched cruise missiles that the United States would try to fire at Russia in order to, let's say, retaliate with nuclear weapons. Whereas Russia has hypersonic missiles that cannot be defeated by any air defense system the United States has. So in other words, they're in a situation where, and if the Russians decided that they felt that their back was to the wall and that they had no other option, they could launch a nuclear strike against the United States that we could not defend against. And in fact, Russia could defeat us, and any attempt by us to launch and destroy Russia, put them under the threat that we could do to them what they did to us, Russia would actually have a very good chance of defeating us. We're already seeing, like right now in the war in Ukraine, we have given the Ukrainians HARM missiles. HARM missiles are designed to take out anti-aircraft and air defense systems by the Russians. Every one of those that have been fired have been blown up by the Russians. So they've proven that the one weapons system that the United States is offering to the world to defeat Russia air defense systems is being blown up by Russian air defense systems. It's not good news for the contractor that makes the HARM missile.
Putin recently did a press conference in Kazakhstan, just a couple of days ago, and I haven't seen a lot of coverage of it in America. When I do see it, of course, you get a lot of sensationalism, but you seem to be someone who's focused on the facts as they actually seem to present themselves. What was the takeaway point you got from that press conference and some of the question and answer that took place?
No, if any, I posted it at Sonar 21, and any of your listeners can go there and view it for themselves and make their own judgment. But just compare and contrast Putin, how he handles himself, how he answers questions, his command of information with Joe Biden. I mean, it's just, it's a night and day difference. Putin is intelligent, competent, articulate, smooth, and doesn't get rattled. And he faced some, relatively tough questions. What he made, the points he made is that Russia is not going to be backed into a corner and roll over like a whipped dog. They're going to stand up and pursue their interests, and it is going to, they noted that they tried to have negotiations with Ukraine, but that was shut down and blocked by the United States and by the United Kingdom under Boris Johnson. So that, Russia is going to press forward with his current mobilization. Putin indicated that he did not anticipate that there would be a need for further mobilization of forces, that what's going on with his current mobilization will be sufficient to defeat Ukraine militarily. And we, need to wrap our minds around that when Russia, and I don't think it's an if question, I think it's a when question, when Russia defeats Ukraine, it will also be the defeat of NATO. It will be a sign that NATO is basically a weak, ineffective organization, and Russia will have beaten it by taking out its proxy, which is Ukraine at the current time.
From that conference, was there any indication that the Russians intend to, take over Kyiv even and fully occupy the whole country?
No. What I think, Putin made it clear that they will defeat Ukraine militarily. But I think Putin and the rest of his advisors recognize that trying to take over the western portion of Ukraine would just be a potential nightmare because of the large number of, let's call them what they are, Nazi supporters. They are, they've been very supportive and enthusiastic in commemorating the history of the SS divisions and the Nazis in Ukraine. But I think what Russia and Putin intend to do is cut it off, isolate it, so that, like building a wall around a swamp, that you contain it, but you don't go in and try to control it.
Some folks are concerned about potential false flag nuclear strikes, that some of this, some of the rhetoric that's being used and the incentives of, you hear about the Ukrainian government saying, hey, we need to do a strike first before they strike us with nukes. And you wonder, what's the incentive if they feel backed up into a corner to do some kind of false flag? They certainly wouldn't get a fair investigation as to who did it if that was the intention.
Now, I discount it as a possibility. I mean, you're absolutely correct. There is that talk. There is that language. Ukraine does not have the missile technology, does not have the aviation technology or capability present now to carry out such an incident if they did have, let's say they did have a tactical nuke of some sort. I wanted to blame it on Russia. While Russia is well armed and well prepared to respond, I think they recognize that if it goes that route, it would be not just the death of Ukraine, it would be the death of Europe. And there is some very reckless rhetoric and comments being made, but in spite of all that recklessness, I've been within the conventional sphere, and Russia's proceeding this at its own pace. You got a lot of armchair generals, but their analysis has by and large been wrong. I've never, it's sort of a sad spectacle to watch all of these U.S. generals, from General Jack Keane and Barry McCaffrey and others. The reality is U.S. generals they've got a 40-year history of losing. I mean, we don't like to admit it, but we're losers. Yeah. We have not won a single war against the first world peer. We talk a good game. We're sort of like the fat guy that's sitting in an easy chair eating Cheetos and drinking beer, talking about what a great fighter he is. But he didn't get out of the chair to actually fight somebody that's a world-class fighter. When we spend time, I listen to the punditry continually attack and disparage the Russians as being incompetent, et cetera, et cetera. We couldn't pull off what they've pulled off. Look at what we did. We retreated in abject shame from Afghanistan. We pulled out of Iraq without quieting and quelling the terrorism taking place there. America really needs to step up and we need like an intervention, just as you would intervene with somebody who's an alcoholic. We need to come to grips with, our own failings and inadequacies before we, run around talking about the failings and inadequacies of other countries. Our track record sucks, to put it candidly.
Well, yeah, it's D.C.'s track record. I think a lot of Americans don't accept that kind of insane foreign policy, but there seems to be little ability for the American people to rein in their leadership in D.C. that seems hell-bent on, doing their thing. So what is a realistic scenario by which this thing resolves in a way where the West can claim to have saved face to some degree and the Russians can claim victory and everybody kind of chills out on here? I mean, what's a realistic path where they can all kind of walk out of this?
I don't think there is a realistic path on that front. I think the United States is going to get beat. The reality is Europe is going to self-immolate economically. It is already, the inflationary spiral is going up. Unemployment is increasing. Businesses are failing at an increasing rate. So the financial crisis that's confronting Europe is real. And the United States is not going to be far behind. So we're not really in a position that we'll be able to dictate any terms to Russia. I think it'll be just the opposite.
Well, Larry Johnson, I really appreciate your time, and I want people to check out your website, sonar21.com, for more of your comments and more about what you do. Maybe we'll get you on again for talking about firearm training. I know you do that here in the area.
Sure.
So thanks for coming on. Sonar21.com is Larry Johnson's website.
Great. Thank you, David.